recorded live.
You know, I swear to God, that sounds like me when he says recorded live. I don't know how they got somebody who sounded like me. Welcome, everybody, to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is our June 20th, 2014, and it's kind of hard to believe that the year is half over already. Tomorrow, I guess, is the traditional first day of summer for those who are into where the Earth and the Sun hang out together, and a lot of other people think it's, I guess, around Memorial Day. Tonight's special guest is Jiba Molei Anderson of Griot Enterprises, and Jarvis is going to pop up the links for those of you in the chat room, and then I'll be announcing them for those of you who pick this up as a podcast a little bit later. He is also a resident of Chicago, you know, where I think, you know, some of the probably the best quality people in the world come from. And not that I'm biased. I just happen to have some really good friends. Are you back, Jiba, from getting your refreshments and everything?
Yeah, I got my refreshments. I'm ready and ripping and all that other good stuff. So let's do this. Let's do this proper.
All right. First, excuse me. First thing I want to do is I want to welcome you to the show and thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem at all. And excuse me, with the broad reach of your talent and your accomplishments, it's kind of an honor to have somebody, you know, like you stopping by. So, I mean, let's get the preliminaries out of the way. The first thing I want to know is, you know, I just found out, you know, you live not far from me, you know, just a matter of a couple miles from me. But did you grow up here in Chicago?
No, actually, I'm a transplant. You could say I'm a little bit of an expatriate, but not really. I was originally born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I came out here in '95 when I was pursuing my master's degree at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And after I got my degree, I just stayed here and made my life and my career out here in Chicago. So
how long have you been here?
I've been here, 95. So what?
Oh, okay.
Almost.
All right.
19 years. Yeah, 19 years. Next year it'll be like 2 decades, man.
Yeah, and I mean, just between you and me, I visited Detroit, and unfortunately it was during the mid-'90s, and Detroit looked very, very much like Beirut when we were visiting. I was visiting with, what was I doing? Oh, I was with Leo Burnett helping them sell something to Oldsmobile, the Oldsmobile car division. But this was before they had the downtown rebuilt up. You know, there was a lot of construction going on. Obviously, you can see there was a lot of, I would say probably financial collapse. But, you know, the people were extremely nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things were happening there. I mean, it's my hometown, you know what I mean? I say that Detroit is the home of innovators and not imitators, and definitely Detroit is the home of the do or die. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to being an artist, it's like if you can make it as creative from Detroit, you can literally make it anywhere. You know, and so that you know that goes from like you know the Detroit techno scene. You know, with Derek May and Juan Atkins, and you know, I'll start naming off that pedigree from the hip hop, Slum Village, Eminem, going back to Motown. You know, so it's like you know, I always have love for my home city because my home city, you know, it made me what I am. You know what I mean? It's you can call it the home of the rough geek, if you will.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
But I mean, let's be honest. To have grown up there, and you know, developed. Well, let's say first manifested, you know, creative talents, and then you know, once you manifested to develop them, and even though you came down to the Art Institute, which is, I mean, it's an unbelievable school in terms of creativity. You know, another BSFS member, Sahai A. Bear, she just won some really huge national prestige awards and is getting a play that she wrote. She's getting that done in New York. It's going, like, I guess it's off Broadway, but I mean, the Art Institute is a great place to, I guess that word is matriculate. What did you study there when you were there? I mean, did you have a specific discipline that you were like pushing out or working on while you were there?
I was a visual communications major, which is really a fancy word for graphic design. I've always said that. And when I went there for grad school, it's interesting. Actually, my whole education has been towards the creation of comics. So when I came there in '95, and when I subsequently entered my master's program, my thesis was on comics, and at the time it was about the analysis of African American superheroes and tying it in with African mythology, specifically Yoruba culture and whatnot. Because I, at the time, also the fact that my mother is from West Africa, is from Liberia specifically. What I wanted to do in that analysis is that, first of all, I didn't want to fall in the trap of the gloom and doom of like, oh, we don't have any characters of color in this American mythology, which is the superhero. First of all, through my research, I debunked that. And secondly, another thing that I was looking at was the dearth of African American creators in the game historically, because we have had a place, African Americans have had a place in the comic book industry since its inception. The American comic book industry, which grew out of the newspaper strip industry.
Sure.
and we've been there, since George Harriman and Crazy Cat, which is, lauded as one of the classic greatest comic strips of all time. And so, and also what I wanted to do is I kind of wanted to dispel the myth of Afrocentricity, if you will, in this pursuit of this. The whole notion of Afrocentricity focusing on Egypt. When you think about the slave trade and you think about the African Americans, well, what became African America in the United States did not come from Northern Africa, did not come from Egypt. It came from West and South Africa and Central Africa, really. If you want to think about just the routes, it doesn't make sense to get a group of people and take them all the way around from Egypt all the way over to the States. This sounds very academic about a very horrible time in the diaspora's history, but these are the things that I wanted to think logically about it. And so that's why I wanted to delve more into Yoruba cultures, into West African mythology, so on and so forth. And through that thesis became the basis for the Horsemen. So you can thank the School of the Art Institute of Chicago to an extent for, having a hand in me creating the Horsemen.
Well, I mean, obviously you got, and I don't mean this to be glib, but you got through school, so your thesis must have been defended well, as they say in academic circles. But and it's a good. That speaks well of the Art Institute to have, to not have had. Did you face any resistance for that? Because it sounds like it was pretty egalitarian of them to allow you to make your own way that way?
Well, the thing about it is that when I first got there, I got some resistance, but really it was the resistance in the study of comics when I first got there. It wasn't like, they were challenging my analysis of culture. It was,
right.
I mean, you have to remember, this is the mid-'90s. This is like before comic book movies made, billions of dollars, right?
Right. I mean, basically, you had by that time you had the two Superman movies, the first two Superman movies.
Well, it's like, all right, if we're thinking about 95, it's like, we went through 89, and the first Batman movie was a success, and then you had the sequels and whatnot. You had movies like The Crow coming out, which was really cool. And then at the same time, you had, like, Sly Stallone's Judge Dredd, which was pretty horrible. And then you also had, like, Tank Girl, which was pretty freaking bad. You know what I mean? So this was before, this is like before Blade. You could say like the state of the comic book industry or the comic book in public domain or in public awareness. It's before Blade, and then there's like after Blade. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's like I was in grad school. I was in grad school right before Blade. You know what I mean? And then I got out of grad school like right after Blade. So there was some initial pushback, but I just stuck to my guns. And once I stuck to my guns, and once I, through the cultural aspect of it and really the mythological aspect of studying superheroes, then there was support. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is a school that for a graduate thesis, I saw an artist put up 2 big plexiglass squares filled with dryer lint. So I kind of like, hedged my bets as if, okay, you're going to allow that to be a thesis, you can allow me doing comic books to be a thesis, Yeah. And so I just kind of stuck with my guns in that way,
That's pretty cool. Now, I mean, that's graduate school. When did you, like, how old were you when you started? I mean, obviously everybody draws in kindergarten and stuff like that, but when did you kind of feel that going toward comic books or creating your own content or whatever, or what, how did your creative bent in that direction start out?
Well, first of all, I got to say that when it comes to like African American artists and creators in general, I have to say that I'm pretty lucky because my base was so strong. Like, both sides of my family, my mother's side, which is the Liberian side, and my father's side, which is the African American side, both sides are very artistically inclined. And also both sides, realize that you could have a career in this, right?
Right.
So, and my father's an architect, my mother, she always like did things like crafts, she sews, you know what I mean? Her art was sewing, her art was cooking, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. So I was raised in a household where art was uncommon, where art wasn't uncommon, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And doing it wasn't uncommon. So when I was a little kid, my mother clocks it at 2 when I first picked up a pencil and started writing on the walls, so on and so forth. I officially put my start of kind of knowing what I like to do around 5 when I started drawing stuff. And, and I was, of course, as a little toddler, I was a big fan of the Batman TV show. And, and I would play Batman with my younger brother, so on and so forth. But it was my dad who brought home my first comic, and I remember that around the age of 5. And I remember that it was a Batman comic. Uh-huh. And so that put me on the path. At 7, I knew I wanted to be an artist. At 8, I thought I wanted to be an architect like my father, but then I realized you don't draw people in architecture. And so So it was around the age of 10 that I was like, you know what? I like comics. I want to make comic books. I never said that. I said that I wanted to make comic books. You know, because even at that point, like once I got that bug, you know, I got the bug for the medium itself. You know what I mean? Yeah, like DC was my entree, Batman was my entree, but in terms of that was really my entree into the world of comics. And so once I saw those books, I wanted to see more comics. You know what I mean? I knew from an early age. I'm like, DC and Marvel, this just can't be it. There's got to be more. There's got to be more stuff. So, you know, even as a little kid and as a tween, if you will, you know, I started seeking out a lot of different things. I started seeking out independence from an early age. Like I was reading ElfQuest, you know what I mean, when I was like 11 or 12, right? You know, wow. I got into things like heavy metal. You know what I mean? I remember First Comics in Chicago, you know, that I loved reading that stuff because I remember their flagship title, Warp. You know, I remember seeing the play in Detroit when I was a kid, in that play, which was, you know, I don't know how many of you guys remember the comic book Warp, but it was kind of like this sort of like science fiction, Doctor Strange kind of mashup. And the cool thing about seeing the stage play was like that was the first time that I saw a black superhero, because the lead, Lord Cumulus, was played by an African American, and that was like, oh, word up. So yeah, we are superheroes. We are cosmic. So I've just been kind of, I've immersed myself in the world of comics from an early age, and you know, how many years later I'm still in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but when you say what you just said, when you explain what your inspiration was, you know, that just reinforces the notion that a lot of people tend to overlook. But I'm talking about the notion of when you see people who look like you doing things, there's a natural expectation that goes on in the back of your mind, or even in the front of your mind, that, you know what, if he could do it, I could do it. You know?
Definitely.
And my big example about that is, look at all these young kids who will have had nothing but a black-looking president for their entire formative years.
Right.
And so, you know, for them, the idea of, is this out of reach, it just doesn't occur, because it's a reality. It's a reality. And then for you to go and for you to see, you know, a superhero at that age, and that's a pretty young age to have seen that, because remember, black superheroes are a relatively new cultural phenomenon. And for you to see it that early, it did exactly that. You know, you're sitting there going, oh, my God, you know, there are black superheroes, and I'm going to make me some.
Right. And I think, and also part of it is that above and beyond seeing the superheroes of the day, it was really just, you know, looking at my family. You know what I mean? From that day. I mean, you know, for all intents and purposes, you know, I was kind of a Cosby kid in terms of, you know, it's middle-class upbringing, and because it was a middle-class upbringing, you know, and because it was also a bicultural upbringing as well, because you got to remember, like, an African household and an African-American household, they're two different things, right?
Sure.
There's different cultures going on, and things of that nature, and also, you know, because of my family, you know, my mother's family and my father's family. My mother's family, in some ways, you know, I was able to get that worldview. You know what I mean, of what black folks can do. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, on my mother's side, you know, they're professionals. They're professional artists. You know, a lot of them are teachers. You know, A lot of my family, you know, are involved in international affairs. I've had family members who work for the United Nations, so on and so forth, right? And then on the flip side, with my dad's family, it's like I learned the value of the grind, and I learned the value of humility, and I learned the value, of for lack of a better term, regular folks who aspire to greater things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
it's like, because my pops came from the hood, right? And my dad grew up poor. And my dad, you know, was the one who decided to go into architecture, not because he saw anybody else doing it, but, you know, I remember I was shooting pool with him a couple of years ago, and I asked him why he went into architecture, and he said that combined my two greatest loves, art and science. And you know, he had that mindset. So, you know, he was the one, he put himself through college through a fencing scholarship. It's like, how many brothers do you know fence? Right?
Right.
So it's like already like coming into the mix, you know, again, that's why I say I'm extremely lucky, because I was born into a family that had no limits, that saw no limits. You know what I mean? And so
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, as much as, you know, seeing that play Warp, which was a big influence, you know, my family is a huge, huge influence on me as well.
Of course. I mean, you're going to look around. I mean, kids always look up to their parents, you know. A lot of them look up to their dads, what have you. And the other thing is, when you see someone around you who is proving the notion or breaking stereotypical bounds of what is, quote, the possible, unquote, it has a huge impact on shaping a person's their dreams, their forward-looking desires, and things like that. And it's funny that you mentioned that you were basically a Cosby-type kid, because in terms of American sociology and the expectations of mainstream America, you and me, for that matter, we don't exist. You know, you
right.
had these same dumbass people, these same people of limited intellect saying things like, oh, the Cosby Show, where you have a black doctor and a black lawyer and they get married and they have children who have white problems. I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is there are no such things as middle-class black people in the American cultural lexicon. You got musicians, you got athletes, you got Oprah. She's got her own category just by herself. And, you know, all of a sudden, somebody says, well, gee, here's a middle-class black family. And they go, wait, there's two parents, and the kids aren't selling crack. And you know, then you realize exactly the cultural damage that we have to overcome just to raise sane kids. You know?
Well, yeah. Well, you know what's really interesting, because, you know, during that time, and if you really think about the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, right? You know, I'm assuming we're around the same age. You know what I mean? So we have a lot of the similar experiences. But
well, I watched TV during those times, but I'm like 84 years old. But go ahead, continue your story.
Right on. Right on. Well, you know, it was what was interesting about those times, and I know, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about the black family, about black representation as of late, especially in the last couple of years. But it's because people, I believe, have forgotten that, you know, through those 3 decades, and actually, if you want to be real about it, leading up to Obama's first election, one of the reasons why, you know, we were ready, so to speak, in 2008 for a black president is because we've had over 30 years of, like, media saturation, some of it subversive, you know what I mean, some of it outright, where you began to see the black middle class. You began to see African Americans striving and also controlling their own images of who and what we are. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, like you can look to Good Times, and then you can look to the Jeffersons, and then you can look to What's Happening, and then you can look to the Cosby Show, and then later on you can look to, you know, the movies of Spike Lee and Robert Townsend and Keenan Ivory Wayans, and going into the 90s of, you know, John Singleton, and then later on Antoine Fuqua, F. Gary Gray. You can look at Martin. You can look at Living Single. You can look at A Different World. You can look at the Jamie Foxx Show. You can look at the Wayans Brothers Show. I'm saying all of these things because we had a diversity of what we could be as a people. So on the one hand, yeah, you had the blaxploitation movies. You know what I mean? Later on in the 90s, you had what was quote unquote the gangsploitation movies. All of that stuff. You had the negative, but it was also balanced with the positive, and then it was also balanced with the diversity as well. And what has happened, I think one of the reasons why people are lamenting so much right now about how we are perceived is because I think a lot of us have forgotten how we were perceived. And they are waiting for someone else that is not them to perceive them in the way that they want to be perceived, and it just don't make sense. You understand what I'm saying?
That's absolutely true. I mean, and well, look at what happened. Just in terms of television, it was, what was it? It was 1968 when we had Julia. Remember the TV show Julia? And that was the first TV show that had a black woman as the lead character. And then now let's flash forward to how long it took to see the next one happen. You know, that's a generation. We're talking a full generation before something else hit the airwaves of any kind of similarity at all. So we had some ensemble shows where there were black characters, but not the lead. You know, you had what's his name, Link and Mod Squad, and you know, bad attitude and a bad hairdo does not make, you know, a unnecessarily a cultural icon, but that was about the extent of the kinds of examples that we had. So I think in terms of what you're talking about, I believe you're right. I believe that there was a semblance of being ready for something because resistance had been softened. Cultural resistance had been beaten down a bit. And then, I mean, if we're going to talk about, you know, how a cultural icon becomes president of the United States, you have to look back at, you know, a skinny black guy with ears sticking out of the side of his face giving one of the most compelling speeches ever given at
And are you speaking about
2004?
Yeah, you're speaking about the DNC. You're speaking about the DNC in 2004.
When I swear to you, I was sitting in a bar and a restaurant when he did that speech, and I stood up and I said to these people, "That's our next president of the United States of America," and folks thought I had lost my mind. They honest to God, they thought, and I think you're right, because there was some cultural inertia that had been working, you know, both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes at the same time. And things came to a cultural head, and the fatigue of what had been going on continuously. You know, first you have Reagan, a senile old bat who really, he wasn't really running the country. He wasn't setting policy, but some pretty vicious actors behind him were. And then you have George Bush the first. And he was pretty feckless himself, and then you had Clinton, and then you had the death, just a truly awful George
Yeah.
W. And then,
Oh, Lord.
and then, how was a John McCain? And I know we're off the subject of art, but how was a John McCain going to beat somebody who obviously had vitality, who had ideas, who even though he was young, he excited people. And
right.
they made fun of him being a community organizer. But how do you organize a community? Through persuasion.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And another thing that and again, the climate was ready. We were ready for that. You cannot diminish the cultural importance of hip hop, and
right.
and how hip hop really did break down these societal walls. I mean, if you want to talk about the last great youth movement, hip hop is it, because hip hop, in terms, it's more than just the music. You know what I mean? It is a cultural phenomenon, right?
And it's worldwide. It's worldwide.
It's worldwide, and it works on a creative level. It worked on an economic level. You know what I mean? It's really worked. It's really worked on a cultural level. The problem is with hip hop right now is that in terms of that, people are trying to discoize it, if you will, and turn it into a formula, and trying to take away some of the political, socio relevance to the form.
You're right, but let's be honest. That's what the music industry has done traditionally forever. I mean, go back to Chubby Checker. Go back to all of the 1950s black crooner groups, and essentially you see a very strategic co-opting of the cultural memes in order strictly to make money.
Right.
And you're right.
Yeah,
and you're right.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And we've seen that. And we definitely we know that story. We know that story. The difference with hip hop, I think, is that hip hop itself saw those classic stories, and most cats if we think about the Jay-Z's, the Jay-Z's, the Russell Simmons, the Diddy's, the Master P's, if you think about a lot of those cats, it's like they saw even the Suge Knights, they saw how the game was played before, and then they said, no, we're not playing that game. You see what I mean?
Exactly.
But what we're seeing now with young cats getting into the game is that they've forgotten that entrepreneurial spirit. They've forgotten, you know what I mean? Like you have a lot of cats walking in selling out. You know what I'm saying?
That's deliberate. But that's deliberate on the part of the music industry. Remember,
right.
they want to control that. They want, again, when I talk about co-opting, they okay, let me just say this, and people can get on my ass later.
It's all good. It's all good.
No, not you. But without that mentality, how could a Vanilla Ice exist? You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, totally, yeah.
So you are like 100% right about the way big business tries to absorb current trends and make it completely into an industry for making money rather than an avenue for culture or even entertainment.
Right. Now what's interesting is like all this stuff that we just talked about in terms of like hip hop and culture and the election of Barack Obama, this can apply to the comic book industry right now.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? Like right now, comics are at the point that hip hop was. Like, the minute the Avengers made over $1 billion, the game done changed. Right?
Absolutely.
the game done totally changed. You know, it's like the mouse purchased Marvel. You know what I mean? Which made the rabbit now take a look at DC and say, oh yeah, we've had this for decades. Now let's get up into it. And so, you know, what we're seeing right now currently, with what I'd like to now call the corporate 2, is that we're seeing that homogenization. You know what I mean? We're seeing that, like, you know, basically putting characters in blackface as opposed to, like, you know, creating interesting characters of color, or even using the characters of color that they already have in new and interesting ways. You know what I mean? Now all of a sudden, you know, they think it's a big thing to make Wally West biracial. You know what I mean? Like we're doing something. You know what I mean? Or the
insult. Wait. Or the insult of just making, you know, casting a black person for Storm as if that's some sort of cultural leveling of the playing field, or even a nod toward cultural inclusion. You know what I mean?
Oh, are you talking about casting a black person as Johnny Storm, not as X-Men
as Storm in the X-Men Storm.
Oh, okay. Oh, like what, a dark-skinned black person? Or, yeah,
well, you know, I have actually met her at O'Hare Airport, and she smells lovely. But
yeah, are you talking about Hallie?
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah,
I mean, you know, to them, that was adding cultural diversity to that Marvel to the X-Men universe. You know what I mean?
Right. You know, ironically, I'll say this. Ironically, for once Marvel, once they had their own studio, and started controlling their own movies. Yeah. You realize, like, in the Marvel movies, you know, Blade aside, because Blade is its own beast. You know, we'll thank Wesley Snipes. We'll thank Wesley Snipes for that. But with Marvel Studios, what I found really interesting, and actually one of the things I like about the movies, is that if you really think about it, you know, like, people talk about, again, when some people complain about, you know, representation in film, you know, I have to remind some cats. I actually had a conversation with Brandon Thomas a couple months ago about this thing, you know, and people are complaining. I'm like, we were both like, do you realize, like, who leads the Avengers in the movies? It's Nick Fury. You know what I mean? Like, Samuel L. Jackson, he leads the Avengers. Like, he runs things. You know what I'm saying? He runs S.H.I.E.L.D. Do you realize that, like, you know, I'm sure you saw Winter Soldier by now, right?
Yeah, it accidentally fell onto my hard drive, yes.
Okay, right on. Well, you know, I mean, in terms of, like, the Falcon, people were like, well, how come the Falcon isn't a lead? It's like, Falcon was never really a lead in any of the comics. And when you saw the Falcon in the Captain America movie, I was like, word up, that's the Falcon. You know what I mean? Like, like, you know, like, his moment, like, the character was treated with respect. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of respect. You know, Anthony Mackie brought, you know, the proper dignity, you know what I mean, to Sam Wilson and whatnot.
Well, there was no cartoonish aspect to him at all.
Right. And you look at the Iron Man movies, it's like Roddy was in all three movies, right? You know? Right. And it was like from the second movie on, you know, he was an equal character, you know? And especially with the third movie, people were complaining like you didn't see enough of them in the armor. What you actually saw in the third Iron Man movie is like you saw Roddy Rhodes being the badass, and, like, I'm looking at the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, he is in the Air Force. Yeah, he would totally be like a badass without the armor. Sure. You know what I mean? He's like a soul. Yeah. So in terms of, like, that representation, you know what I mean? In the films, it's like that. You know, it's there. It's there, and I'll tell you, Marvel has done a much better job cinematically with that than DC has been doing cinematically or in the comic books for the past few years.
Right.
You know, So DC has to play catch-up, but it has to play catch-up in a real way, which we're probably not going to see for quite some time, especially now that, DC has moved its publishing out to L.A., you know what I mean? So now it's going to be even more in La La Land, and so we'll see how that develops. But
well, that's one thing that I fully believe that is one aspect about the comic book industry that bodes well for independent and even black themed comics, because remember, comic books now in the DC and the Marvel arena, the writing is played out. It is lacking imagination. Basically what they're doing is they're making destruction porn in terms of the movies, and then now they've got movies, they've got a TV show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and they have to and you have the comics themselves, and now what you have to do in order to maintain a certain creative consistency is you have to force all three genres or all three media types into some sort of convergence in order to make at least the token attempt of keeping your readers happy. And that's just not good. And what I see that as an opportunity for quality black-themed and independent comics to not only pick up the slack, but have a chance at making a better way and attracting better, more readers. Because if the writing is superior, and let's be honest, it wouldn't be very hard to accomplish superior writing given the kind of crap they're putting out there now. So
right.
if you have interesting characters and you have great storylines, I think this is a good opportunity. And then, of course, the hard part about that is reaching the audience. That's always been a problem.
Right, right. And you're absolutely right about that. It's a great time for creativity. And you're seeing like the independent book having a resurgence, right?
Right.
I would say for a couple of years it was a little low, but definitely independents have stepped their game up, and are like in some ways, giving you that nutritional value that you're missing in your DC and Marvel comic book. Like at this point, you can look at DC and Marvel. They're now McDonald's and Burger King. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They used to be more substantive, and that's why I felt like independence for a while. I mean, there's still some great stuff out there. I'm always a reader of independence, but I increased personally my independent reading over the past 2 years because it's like, the corporate two are just not satisfying. So
right.
it's like from that, you have great books like Watson and Holmes. You know what I mean? You have projects like Midnight Tiger. You have Miranda Mercury coming out. You know what I mean? From the others, like for instance, I'm reading books like Black Science and Velvet and Rocket Girl and Real Heroes and Jupiter's Legacy. You know what I mean? Like there's some cool stuff that the independents are putting out there. I'd like to think that myself, being an independent, that the Horseman is also a part of that mix of quality product. That's what I strive to do each and every time I come out. In terms of getting it out to the wider audience, therein lies the difficulty, and the difficulty is kind of twofold. All right? Like, first of all, the difficulty is in distribution, of course. And the way that the stores are set up right now, they're basically under the thumb of Diamond, and they don't necessarily have to be, because Diamond isn't necessarily the only distributor out there. You know, the great thing about being an independent now is that you do have the benefits of of print-on-demand outfits like Kablam, which owns Indie Planet, which is what I go through, Drive-Thru Comics, Comixology, you even have Amazon, so on and so forth. And so you have a possibility in terms of distribution of books getting to stores, but the thing of that is that you have to get the store to order beyond Diamond, because Diamond is easy. You know what I mean?
Well,
Diamond
is easy. Of course.
And then plus with Diamond closing off its doors to independents for profitability, their difficulty is getting into Diamond, but you can go around it through print on demand. That's one thing. The second thing is, I'm actually going to say it's three things. The second thing is awareness, which is another thing that if you're an independent, you got to be on the grind. You know what I mean? It's like it is not enough for you to sit in your room, sit in your studio, and draw pages or write pages and things of that nature. It's like you've got to put the work in. I mean, with comic books, and I hear this a lot. People ask like, what makes a good comic book? People are like, oh man, it's the art. People are like, oh man, it's the story. And what it really is that people have to understand that the comic book itself is an exercise of graphic design. You see what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing, and a lot of people, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who go into creating their own comics, and one of the things that I always have a big problem with is that they don't study and master the fundamentals.
Exactly.
And the fundamentals are not, oh, you can draw some slam and art. And the fundamentals are not, oh, you have a decent storyline here. And let's be honest, a lot of people can hit a decent storyline, but the fact of the matter is, in order to achieve longevity in comics, you have to be able to maintain that story arc over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of people don't think in terms of. I've watched a couple comic lines write themselves into a corner where they got to the point where in order to go any further, they had to do something that was so wild and so unrealistic that I watched them close down because they lost their audience. So it is not an inconsiderable task, and you're right. But the fundamentals, you've got your fundamentals, all right? You've been drawing forever, but you know what? You even went to school for it. And a lot of people go, oh, man, I don't really need to go to school. I don't need to read anything. I don't need to know anything about storytelling or anything because I'm just keeping it real. And you and I both know what that means. That means they got about a year's worth of comic in them, and that's out, and they're out,
It's not even, they don't even have a year of stories. It's like they have a concept, but they haven't thought about the concept. And even when they think about it's like, okay, this is the best way I can describe it. Okay, so I have a number of guys. When I go out, I always have a number of people. They ask me whether or not they ask me what their story idea is. First thing is that I ask them what the concept is. They come with I don't want to share the concept per se. It's funny. I'm getting prompted. They don't want to share the concept, but after a little bit of coaxing, the whole idea of I'm not going to steal your idea, then they tell me the concept. And the first thing that they say about the concept, it's something to the effect of, well, it's a post-apocalyptic story, and the government is blah, 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 and then I have to tell them, it's like, okay, stop right there, all right? If we talk about post-apocalyptic societies, I can mention 5 properties off the top of my head that deal with a post-apocalyptic society.
Mm-hmm.
I use examples like The Matrix, Mad Max, Terminator, Planet of the Apes, and Akira.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And I tell the person, like, each one of those concepts deals with a post-apocalyptic society. Now, what is the underlying message of that concept? And they ask me, well, what are you talking about? Well, then I can say, well, let's talk about Planet of the Apes, for example. The underlying concept behind Planet of the Apes is it's really an allegory on racism. The underlying concept for a post-apocalyptic society like Mad Max is the question of what happens when we run out of natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
The Terminator, of course, is about what happens when
technology runs amok. Yeah.
Right. You could say the same thing about The Matrix, but really The Matrix is even more about choice versus purpose, right? What is real? What is not real? This whole sort of surrealist, nihilistic, cyberpunk sort of thinking. And then I say Akira is basically, just like most anime, is the sort of question of what happens when man tries to control nature, which we see with a lot of Japanese pop culture. It goes from the kaiju, movies, the Godzilla movies, the Super Sentai movies, or shows like Ultraman, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, so even down to Pokemon. And so when I tell them that, they're like, oh. And then I'm like, right. It's not enough when you talk about things like post-apocalyptic, or it's a fantasy, or it's science fiction, or it's a Western. That's just the trapping of which you are telling your story. What is the story that you're really trying to tell?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that a lot of people who want to create in general, and especially since we're talking about comics, that's the thing that they don't think about. And that's the thing that gives your property weight. You see what I mean?
Oh, and look, I'm a writer. I understand completely. I mean, the allegory to what you're talking about is, I have people come to me because I write novels, and they go, oh, hey, could you take a look at this? I'm thinking of writing a book. Would you look at my story? Would you look at my whatever? And I'm not quite as nice as you, and I apologize in advance to anybody who ever brings me their stuff. But I go, so where did you get this idea? And then they give me a really, really half-ass idea, and then I go, and you're nice. Me, I go, I can't see how you're going to make any money at this or get people to publish it or anything, because already you're boring the hell out of me. But the reason goes back to, again, a lack of fundamentals.
Right.
Just because you come up with an idea, and coming up with a unique idea is damn near impossible.
Right. About
the last person I ever heard of coming up with a unique idea was essentially me. And I say that only 50% as a joke. Well, no, come on. Stop, think about it. You don't know anything about me, but here, I'll give you the quick log line. The log line for my trilogy, the Dark Side trilogy, is what happens in America when the country finds out that black folks have been secretly living on the backside of the moon since before Neil Armstrong got there.
There you go.
Where's your, first of all, where is your, what's that derivative of? Maybe. I can't even think of you think about it and let me know if you can think of anything that it's derivative of. But see, that's the thing. No matter how good my idea was, it doesn't matter. You still have to execute. You still have to have the fundamentals. You have to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have to create characters that are more than one-dimensional. You have to have subplots that intertwine so that you can justify a certain menagerie of characters and a brilliant tapestry to write against, up against. And when you say that to people, don't you get, when you say something like that to somebody, don't you get that blank look in their eyes, like a deer in the headlights?
Yeah, I have. I've also gotten some pushback when I tell them this truth. Another thing that you have to add in there is color does not make for a character. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I talk to some people, they're like, well, it's a black so-and-so, it's a black so-and-so, and it shouldn't be. It should be, no, you should not compare it to another character, but your character is black. There's no difference. What makes that character truly different? What is that personality? As opposed to trying to create a black version of something, why don't you just create? Period.
Yeah, I think the movie analogy to that is it's the character that Denzel Washington played in Training Day. That could have been a black character or a white character because it was not the color that was the determining factor of the character and his construction. It was what that character was doing in life. I mean, it transcended color. And
right, it could have been played by Christopher Walken. Yeah, it could have been played by Christopher Walken. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's really, and that's kind of what one of the points, with my work that I try to do. It's, yes, I'm working from an African and an African American lens. That's how I see the world.
Sure.
Those are the characters that I tend to create because that's kind of me. That's not to say that I don't have characters of other cultures. I have to have characters of other cultures because that's what's going to help color my world. That's what's going to help make my world resonate with the world of the audience that I'm speaking to. It's more, if you see more visions of not only yourself but others represented in a very human way, that makes the book or the project more palatable for everyone.
And,
right?
And to be honest, if those characters act in a manner that is satisfyingly familiar to people, because there are certain memes in terms of life. There's having to have a job. There's wanting to fall in love and be felt to feel that you've got a great relationship. There's intrigue when somebody stabs someone in the back. None of those things are uniquely any race or anything other than our culture. And if your story resonates from a cultural perspective, people are not only going to recognize what's going on, but if the story is constructed well, you don't have to explain every nuance to them. Exactly.
And that's what I go for every time that I'm creating. And when people ask me those questions, that's what I tell them, because they're usually asking from the aspect of a creator, but they're not asking the right questions. Because the real question that every hopeful wants to know is like, how can I be successful?
Right.
That's what they want to know. That's what they want to know. That's the secret that they want to know. The secret that they want to know whenever someone asks for tips, they're not necessarily asking for tips for art or that sort of thing. Some of them are. And the ones that are actually serious about getting into the business, they ask for those tips. They ask for the craft. But once the craft is there, then really the question that you're asking is, how do I get in this game? How do I navigate this game?
Exactly.
And with a lot of people, And I have to say, with some African-American fans, comic book fans that I've spoken to, I realize that they are strictly DC and Marvel fans. And they don't see the true diversity of what the comic book game has to offer. And and even the ones who want to get into the business, they want to work for DC, they want to work for Marvel, they want to work for the hot company right now. And the thing is that if you concentrate on, I want to work for someone, you're not really concentrating on what is important. It's like, how do I make a career? Which is really what people want to know. How do I make a career in this game? And when you tell them the truth about it, some people take the truth and they're like, okay, this is what I need to do. Some people who don't want to take the truth, they're like, oh, whatever, you know what I mean? And I'm just going to do it my way. And and we see the results of that. But, that's an ongoing discussion, That really is that's an ongoing discussion, and it's a discussion that's unique to any person that's ever asking that question.
Yeah, hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. Anybody who is happening to pick this show up as a podcast, and you are not a member of BSFS, please drop in and join. Tonight's special guest is Jiba Anderson of Griot Enterprises. He is a Chicago transplant. He started out in Detroit, and he's got a plethora of talented things for you to take a look at. You can find him at www.griotenterprises, all one word, .com, and check out his work there. Let's talk specifically about your work. The construction of your characters. What moves you? You mentioned you like to get a certain kind of cultural imperatives in your work. Give us an overview of what your creative universes are like.
Well, my universe, you could say universes. My universe is one of, definitely there's a strong African influence. I definitely use my culture to color my universe. And with the Horsemen in particular, which kind of set me on the path, what I realized with the Horsemen is that I wanted to do for African mythology basically what Jack Kirby did with Norse mythology, in terms of using it as a base but not being a slave to it, using it as a launch point to tell new stories, to really tell a modern mythology about what's happening in this world. What's happening in this world. I mean, that's what the best mythology does. The best mythology speaks to the society at hand, and it shows what's not working, how things could work, and it's done through storytelling. So with my work, it's definitely, as I said earlier, it comes from the African American lens. It's very political. It's very social as well, and that's the basis. That's the basis of my work. That's the root of my work. And I also like to deal with notions of family. I like to deal with relationships as it pertains to this bigger overall world that we're dealing with.
And tell us a little bit about how you constructed your characters. What's important for you in creating the people who populate your universe?
The important thing for me is that they feel real, and that they feel real in the world that is created. Okay. Yeah, my goal is whenever you're creating a world, and I tell this to my students, and I've told this to my students, is that when you're creating a world, you're actually in some ways playing God. In terms of, yes, if you look at Judeo-Christian faith, and they say in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word said, let there be light, and there was light. As a creator, that's what you're doing all the time. Mm-hmm. If you're writing your story, if you are, putting pencil or stylus to paper or the screen, you are creating something new. And so here's the question: are you a benevolent God or are you a bad God? And the way I look at it is like, if I'm going to be a benevolent God, I'm going to create a world as real as possible. In terms of fantasy aside and the outrageousness, if you will, of certain situations aside, it's all about the reaction of the people in that world. And if the reaction of the people in that world is a natural reaction. And beyond that, it's like everybody has that natural reaction. The heroes in my world truly are, multi-gendered, multicultural. Mm-hmm. They're real. People ask these questions like, how do you write a female character? How do you write a person of character? And the answer is simple. It's you write them like real people. It's like if you have friends, you look at your friends and you look at how they react. You have to live in the world. You have to observe the world. And how would somebody react to that situation, right? Like, how would, for instance, a superhero who is seeing the quote-unquote end of the world on a weekly basis, right? And they say that, how would they react to that, in an honest way? It's like some of them are like, oh, again, word, okay, let's do this. You know what I mean? Some people be like, oh my God, But you have to think about it. You have to think about it in real terms, because reality brings drama,
That's true. That's true. And in that instance, everybody. The thing is to make them relatable. And what's more relatable than having to punch the clock and do the same stupid-ass job every damn day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what your dreams are. Perhaps you've got a superhero who goes, I cannot save this world one more time and have them not even care or even bake me a cake or whatever. I mean, people, those kinds of reactions, those kinds of emotions are highly relatable. And I think that makes the aspect of storytelling the art that it is, because some people can describe a birthday party or a celebration or a retirement party in a way that's interesting to other people, and other people write something that is so dead on dull that you just can't go another page. And see, that's where the rubber meets the road. Being an accomplished storyteller is the bottom line in terms of writing a comic, writing a graphic novel, writing a novel, writing a movie. And you're right, character development is damn important. And people go, well, yeah, but it's science fiction and blah, 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 and things will be different. And when they say something like that, I go, did HAL 9000 have a personality in 2001: A Space Odyssey? And they go, well, yeah. I said, well, then, there's an inanimate object who someone made real to the people who watch the movie, and that's the essence of telling a story. If you're going to create characters, they have to be knowable and they have to be real. And so when you do that, do you draw from people and the situations that you have in real life, or do you just have a really good handle on what it takes to be, to create situations and personalities that naturally fall into that kind of environment?
It's a combination of both. Yeah, with the horsemen are based off of people that I know. that was the easiest way. When I started developing the Horsemen back in 97, 98, I had the mythological, I had the Orishas that I wanted to use. I had them down, and I understood what their personalities were when I was reading the myths and reading the descriptions of them. When it came to the human aspect of these characters, their human counterpart, I looked at my family and I looked at my close friends and I looked at, okay, which person has that type of personality that this particular Orisha would attach itself to? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when I did that, I realized, like, okay, now it's easier for me to write the character, because I could write the character not necessarily as how this god would respond to it, but I could write the character as if, how would my brother who is imbued with the power of this god, how would he react to that situation? Sure. And that set it up for character development, because it's like, okay, yeah, I know how they would react to this, and so I would incorporate that into the story. Now, with my other work, I try not to do that all of the time, and I try to give myself, the challenge of really thinking about how the character would react, how the character, would deal with other characters, how would the character deal with the situation, and again, keeping it as authentic as possible.
Yeah. Do me a favor and describe a little bit about the Horseman series. What's kind of like the basic plot? What are we looking at in terms of how you move things forward? Tell us a little bit. Just describe the universe for us.
Okay. In a nutshell, the Horseman is the story of 7 people who have the power of the gods of ancient Africa and are charged with saving the human race from itself. In a nutshell, it's a mythological tale in that centuries ago, millennia ago, a race of beings known as the Orisha came to Earth in order to prepare the dominant species for divinity, for godhood. Okay. And when they saw that mankind was going to be the dominant species, they made themselves known to humanity. Now, humanity did something that they never expected before. Humanity fell to their knees and started worshiping them. And so the Orishas became the basis for all world mythologies, including Judeo-Christian faith, all of that stuff.
Right.
There was a group of Orishas who, when they took physical form and felt this energy from worship, it got good to them. And so they kept their physical form, and they became an offshoot known as the Deities. And the Deities were basically, making mankind their servants, their slaves. They were getting addicted to this worship. The Orisha were not having it, so they started a war. And in that war, if you think about the stories of Noah's Ark and the flood and things of that nature, that was the war. After the war, Earth was almost destroyed, but it seemed that the Deities' influence was gone, and so the Orisha left. That wasn't the case, because 8 of the Deities survived, poked their heads out from the sand, or from the cubby holes, if you will, and proceeded to take over the world in secret by changing their purview of worship. So whereas you had a god of the sun or a goddess of the moon, now you have, a god of organized religion. You have a god of technology. You have a god of commerce, of politics, of lust, that sort of thing. And so the Orisha have to come back and set things right, because, again, we have been taken off of our path. And we have had our attentions diverted to things that really are not the things that we should be thinking about. We are thinking about petty things, whereas the Horsemen are trying to get us prepared for a much bigger destiny in mind. And so the first book, Divine Intervention, came out in 2002. that is collected as a trade and available. There has been a second book called The Book of Olaroon, which is also collected as well. And currently we are in the third series, Mark of the Cloven. And with Mark of the Cloven, this is the first Horseman series that I'm not writing. I brought on Jude W. Meyer, extremely talented, extremely amazing science fiction, horror, and fantasy writer, and he's playing in my wheelbox. He's playing in my wheelhouse. And with Mark of the Cloven, this one, whereas the first two were straight up graphic novels, this one is an illustrated novel. In the fact that it is driven predominantly by text, and I'm coming in and I'm doing spot illustration. Of course, I'm designing the book, so my hand is very much in there. But in terms of the storytelling, that's Jude's wheelhouse. We're definitely co-plotting, so on and so forth. But it's really a lot of fun. Third issue just came out. You can find that and all of our stuff on Indie Planet and on DriveThruComics.com and Amazon as well. In the next few months, we're going to be out in even more venues, so on and so forth. So that's where we are with the story right now. And Mark of the Cloven is really fun. That's where we're really getting to some stuff. We're really getting into seeing the world that the Horsemen that they are creating, and we're dealing with some really interesting things. Africa is now sort of like on the eyes of the world as the next big thing, if you will. They're really coming into prominence. The new African Union has come into prominence. The United States is on a serious decline. So much that people are emigrating from the United States to Africa, to Nigeria, to Lumumba City, which is the city that the Horsemen have created from the destruction of Nigeria. And the United States has enacted this law called the Retention Act, which is basically keeping people in the United States borders. So the Horsemen have basically set up an underground railroad in reverse, where they're helping people escape from the United States and going to Africa, which is the new land of opportunity. And you have them going back to Africa. I have them heading out into outer space. Black folks don't like living here anymore. Well, you know what? For me, it's more of a situation of not necessarily that we don't want to live here anymore, but it's more like, the stuff that's keeping us back, it's all fabricated. I mean, we're not dealing with a food shortage. There's no shortage of food, right? Right. There's no shortage of housing per se. What there is that there's a shortage of resources, right? And even the shortage of resources is fabricated because you have a small group of people, the 1%, hoarding the resources and, not sharing the resources. It's not saying that you have to be broke. It just makes sense. Like, there's only so long rich people are going to be rich in hoarding everything before they realize they have to dole some stuff out so people can buy their products. And if nobody can afford your products, people can't be rich for too long. That's how revolutions get started. Yes, it is. You know what I mean? Well, so you're tapping into essentially what you're doing is you're tapping into current culture to augment your creative universe, which also makes for the familiar. When someone reads, again, you don't have to have a whole lot of exposition because what's going on at base level, what the background tapestry is not only knowable, but it's the familiar. Exactly. And that's what we're dealing with right now. And in that, with Lumumba City, we're also able to explore some very interesting notions. Like, for instance, the third issue of Mark of the Cloven, Jude and I, we talked about, like, what happens, you know, in Africa. You have all these people coming in, and Lumumba City is a very diverse world, and we basically created a militant group of black racists who were inspired by the Horsemen. So we're playing with that. So we have this militant group called the First Men. You could call them our Al-Qaeda, if you will. You could call them, in some ways, our KKK. And they're all dark-skinned Africans.
Okay.
You know, who are not happy with all, you know what I mean, with all of these different people coming in. And they were inspired by Shango when he destroyed Nigeria in a fit of divine retribution. And they looked at him, and they looked at Shango, and Shango's dark-skinned man, and they're like, yeah, that's how you do it. That's exactly how you do it. And they were only blessed with Orisha because he's of the first people. Look at him, all dark-skinned and stuff like that. Exactly. That's how we need to do it as well. And so we've got sort of these, you know, interesting subtext happening with the book.
And the cool thing is, again, like I said, it's familiar, and it's something that people are going to be able to glom onto right away.
Right.
I do have a question. You mentioned, well, I'm not writing this part right now. Let's talk about collaborating. Are you an easy collaborator, or was it difficult to actually let go of the reins sufficiently enough for someone else to kind of dig in and kind of get into the meat of the whole thing?
Well, this is my philosophy. You know, when you have a good property, when other people read your property and they get it, and when they start working on it, they understand exactly where you are trying to take this story. And so with Mark of the Cloven, and Jude actually approached me to write this. So I'm like, okay, you know, let's see what you got. And when he started in on it, and I'm hearing what's going on, I'm like, wow, if I had the time, that's exactly what I wanted to do next with the story. So, so in terms of the collaboration with Jude and I, it's very seamless. It's very seamless, and it's quite fun to bounce ideas off of each other and really help craft this story. You know, so it's like, whereas, you know, he's showing me story ideas and whatnot, and we're discussing it, and I'm like, yeah, I like that. And it's very rarely a time where either one of us is like, no, I'm not feeling what you're doing. You know what I mean? I'm not feeling what you're doing with this. I think it's almost never. We've never had like, I don't dig what you're thinking. I don't understand. We're that much in sync. So this collaboration process, it's very, very cool. I mean, it's a lot better than John Byrne and Chris Claremont, I'll tell you that. In terms of us getting along and whatnot. It's really fun, and I do like collaborating. I like collaborating with like minds, and I don't have any problem at all releasing my characters to that type of collaboration, because again, if you think about the history of comics and you think about the history of these classic, iconic characters, you have to think about how many hands have gone into the crafting of those stories. And really, would a character like Batman have lasted 75 years if Bob Kane said, like, I just want to do everything? No, he wouldn't. You know? Like, Batman has evolved beyond Bob Kane and Bill Finger. They set the root. They set the precedent. And the root was strong, and the root was solid, and the foundation was on bedrock. So that later on, you could have these different interpretations from a Dick Sprang, later on from a Neil Adams and a Denny O'Neil, to a Marshall Rogers, to to Frank Miller. You could have the 60s television show. You could have the animated series. You could have, The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. And the thing is, like, all of these iterations are valid because the root of the character is there, and the root of the character is strong. Now, if you start changing with the root, that's where problems come in. But as long as people aren't trying to mess with the root, and I hope I've created a rock solid bedrock from which people can tell stories from, then by all means, it's like collaborate. It's like that's what needs to happen in order for the property to survive beyond me, because I really want it to survive beyond me.
Right. Well, and I think that we're going to have to look and see, like, for example, the next Superman movie, how is that going to be executed when you now have a Superman who it was largely indifferent to the destruction of Metropolis around him, and the hypothetically many tens of thousands of people who probably got killed while he was fighting what's-his-face. And then now you have a Superman who, above everything else, prior to that movie, would never have deliberately murdered anybody. And so now you have him, having deliberately murdered. So, it's not so much a reboot of the character, but it's almost like an evolution to where you're taking a fundamental core value of this superhero that we've had for over half a century, and you've changed some of the fundamentals. So it'll be interesting to see how they execute that. Here's the interesting. This is my Man of Steel statement. Okay. This is the interesting thing. Like, when Superman broke Zod's neck, I called it the equivalent of Jesus climbing down from the cross and blasting away the Romans with an AK-47. Okay.
In other words, again, we're talking about the strength of mythology, right? And we're talking about the strength of American mythology. And Superman is as close to Jesus as you're going to get with this American mythology. And, one of the things that people think about Superman is that Superman never kills, and, Superman has a code against killing. And so when that moment happened in the movie, as opposed to other people's like, oh my God, that's such a travesty, I looked at it as that this is the reason why he doesn't kill. Because he had to do it, because he was placed in a situation where he had no option. Like, before it started, Zod straight up told him, like, look, there's only two ways this is going to go down. Either I'm going to kill you or you're going to kill me. That's it. And Zod created this situation where there was those only two alternatives. And so when Superman took that route, again, I think a lot of people forget, like, he had his keening moments. He did his whale, and, he was devastated at that choice. Guaranteed, the next movies, you're never going to see him kill again, right? If the storytellers are smart, if they're really thinking about this in this way. If I wrote the film, that would be my reasoning as to why he wouldn't do that again, and you had to give him, like, a real reason as opposed to just some, altruistic sort of reason. I'm not just going to do that just because I'm not going to do that. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. So in keeping your mythology consistent and maintaining, your storylines, have you planned out your story arc very, very far in advance? So, are we just looking? Are you kind of making your way, or do you actually have your story arc out there? And for Horseman, you're moving toward wherever you have conceived the end of your arc to be.
Yes and no. In terms of the overall concept of the Horseman, I know where it's going to end, and I know how it's going to continue. In terms of getting there, we're completely open to it. So, for example, divine intervention, it establishes the characters, it establishes the kind of things that they do. With the Book of Olaroon, it establishes the bigger story and the bigger elevation of where all of this is going. With Mark of the Cloven, with this illustrated novel, we are able to get more into the individual personalities of the characters. We're also able to do some very, very strong world building. And when I talk about world building, I'm talking about not only the earth in which the horsemen inhabit, but the other dimensions in the Horseman universe as well. Because we're not just limited to Earth, and we talk about outer space and science fiction. I deal with dimensions as opposed to other planets. That's just what I'm working with. So in that, what I'm doing is like I know where it's going to go, but I'm also open to letting the ride happen. It doesn't have to end tomorrow. There's so many stories that can be told, and there's so many stories that can be told that leads into, that leads into the overall arc. So, in a sense, I will shepherd that as much as possible, especially with the Horseman projects going forward that I'm not doing everything on. I'm still the shepherd for it, But in terms of letting the story progress, letting the story develop, bringing in some new things that I may not have thought about before, I'm open to letting that happen because I think what that does is that it makes the Horseman more resonant, right? And I think it makes it more resonant when people want to take a step into my world and want to work in that world and want to add to that world. That just makes the world that much richer, and that makes the stories that much richer. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Well, and the other thing is, I think that, when you bring in a collaborator, you also bring in fresh blood.
Exactly. Exactly. Because you don't want to be in your head all the time. It gets boring. Or in my case, scary. Right. I think also with a number of people, especially people starting off or wanting to get into the industry and whatnot, you hear a lot of things like, I don't want anybody, I don't want to compromise my vision for anybody and blah, 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 blah. Well, if you have a strong concept, number one. Number two, you got to remember that this is your property. So at the end of the day, if you have a strong property and you've established your property, this is your property. In terms of ownership, you own this bad smoker. So if you have somebody else working on something you own, it's still yours. If we're talking about it from a business standpoint. And so it just, what they're doing is they're helping you look better, right? Especially if you have the right collaborators. They're pumping you up, you're pumping them up. It's a holistic thing, right?
Well, and that's another thing that people sometimes don't pay attention to. When you have a good property, when you have created something that are you playing music in the background?
No, it's just my window is open and you heard the ice cream man.
Oh, okay. Over here, they're either firing off firecrackers or somebody's getting shot a lot of times down the alley here. When it's your intellectual property, not only do you want to maintain the quality so that, because it is a commercial venture, and we're going to get to that part in a little bit, but it is a commercial venture. It is you doing commerce. It is you taking your creative juices and trying to be gainfully employed by it, trying to get compensated for the hard work that you put in. And
Exactly.
and you're right about, okay, and I think you guys sound like you've done it well. I mean, okay, so I've got my property. Okay, I've got a collaborator, and my collaborator is simpatico with me right now. But my collaborator has a whole separate head, and inside my collaborator's head are ideas that could well feed and augment and make my universe prosper.
Exactly.
And so, my question to that is, what if, dreams of all dreams, let's say a Marvel or a DC came to you and they had a blank check and they said, how much money would it take for us to take your idea and make it ours? Can we buy this from you? How do you feel about your intellectual property? Is it something that you can look at as a commodity, or are you really so wedded to controlling it and maintaining it, and you have such a tight buy-in to it that idea would never be entertained by you? I'm just curious, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm kind of interested in how you see your intellectual property.
Okay. Short answer to that is I would work out the deal that Milestone Media worked out with DC. In other words, what Milestone did is that Milestone is an imprint. Okay? Milestone is the comic book equivalent of Death Row Records. All right?
Okay.
And DC is the equivalent of Interscope, in which DC distributed, the Milestone characters. Okay?
Right.
And so, at the end of the day, the Milestone cats still own their characters, right? And they can do whatever they want with it. I mean, they could take it to other publishers if they want to, so on and so forth. That is the thing that I would do. It's not necessarily a situation where I have to be so wedded to it, that I'm not, shall we say, a micromanager. But when it comes to the overall message and the overall standard that I have established for Griot Enterprises and that I have established for the Horsemen, that standard has to be kept. And that standard has to be kept up. It's the same way, for instance, with the last season of the Boondocks, which is what's happening right now.
Okay.
Aaron Magruder is not the showrunner for the last season of the Boondocks, right? And the show has suffered horribly for it. It really does need to be the last season of the Boondocks, because the insight is not there. The insight of satire is not there. Right. And you have characters like Ruckus, who was initially a commentary on a certain type of individual. Now you've got him like in every episode, and they don't understand what that character is. The jokes are rehashed, from funnier episodes, so on and so forth. It's a pale shadow of its former self. And that is something that cannot happen with the Horsemen, especially not now. As it gets stronger, and once, and as this foundation grows, and as it becomes more rock solid, and as my vision is more solidified, then, we get into situations where hopefully, I'll be in a position to, navigate other aspects of getting the work out into different arenas. But at the core message, the core vibe has to be there. And it's like, I cannot work with anyone who doesn't understand that core vibe and that core message. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, so essentially, basically, you have a buy-in sufficiently strong enough for you to not want to ever let your intellectual property get out from under your control, because you feel strongly enough about the universe that you've created that you still want to have control over it. And
right.
I don't say that as anything bad or anything like that. I have a price for if somebody comes to me and wants to hand me a check to take ownership of the Dark Side universe, and it's enough money for me to go ahead and and live quite well. But it's different for me when you write novels. At best you could get like a movie producer who screws up your stuff. Okay,
mm-hmm.
but when you
mm-hmm.
but when you have an ongoing comic with a your own predefined story arc, it is kind of a whole different story, because essentially what they will be doing is they will be taking the creation away from you and turning it into whatever they think it is. And we've seen how many tragic times, how many tragic stories about when, people who are producers take something and screw it up so badly, it removes the value from whatever it is that they touched.
Right.
So, I mean,
and then,
it's go ahead.
Yeah. No, and then it's also, let's think about, for instance, let's look at George Lucas. Let's look at J.K. Rowling. Okay?
Right.
On the flip side, you have creators like that who, they own their properties, right? And they've established it. I mean, they've worked out. It's about licensing, Like when it comes to African American creators. And by the way, the question that you asked, that's not the first time I've had that question asked. It's always about like how much would it take for you to sell your property? Why would I want to sell my property? It's like if we talk about the hip hop analogy, Russell Simmons didn't sell Def Jam until Def Jam was at such a level that people were clamoring to buy it. And even when Def Jam was bought, it's still Def Jam. Rockefeller was still Rockefeller.
Yeah, but I hate to tell you this though. There are far too many people who just want to get paid, and I know, and it's a short-sighted viewpoint, because it's more about, instead of selling your property outright, what about licensing your property? Because exactly.
that way you're always getting paid. Instead of getting one check, you're getting checks, plural.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea, if you're thinking about this as a business, the whole idea is to continue to get paid, continue to eat off of your creation and controlling your creation. Right?
A lot of people don't understand that whole low-hanging fruit concept where you can, there are ways of maintaining control of your property and having a marketing company out there helping you get your word out further, because everybody makes off. Or a studio. The studio says, okay, we'll do the distribution of your web series or whatever, and everybody continues to get paid. I mean, obviously that's the best way to go for a creative, if they can get that kind of deal.
Right.
Let's. We're down to about our last 15 minutes. I want to ask you something. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now, and maybe even somewhere between 5 and 10 years from now? What is your business model? What is your business plan for the next let's say the next 5 years?
Well, the business model is to continue making books.
Right.
The next project after Mark of the Cloven, which will happen in June of next year, is a project called Lumumba Funk. And with Lumumba Funk, what I'm doing is I'm recontextualizing the Horsemen, and actually the creation of the Horsemen from the 70s, as if the Horsemen were created in the 70s, as opposed to me creating it at the end of the 20th century. And what would happen if that book came out in the 70s? What would happen if the Horsemen became a cultural phenomenon? And how would it have influenced, and how would it have been influenced by the culture of the 70s? And it gives me an opportunity, and speaking about collaborations, this project is going to be a big collaboration. I'm collaborating with other writers, and I'm collaborating with other artists. It is a project that's going to be multi-tiered in terms of media. The first part is going to be an art book, which talks about the Horsemen and talks about the Horsemen in the 70s. I even went so far as designing a completely different Horsemen team. And also the creator of the Horsemen is different. So in the 70s, I was born in 72, so I couldn't have created the Horsemen in the 70s. So someone else created the Horsemen in the 70s. And again, it all ties into family, and this project ties into a lot of my influences and a lot of the love that I have for the era, from the music to the films to Saturday morning cartoons to the political and social landscape of the time. And so one aspect of it is that we'll have the art book for it. Another aspect is that we're going to be doing a soundtrack as well. And so my plan is to be multimedia in terms of having books, in terms of having, other aspects of it, of turning it into something that's going to be on the TV screen or going to be on the movie screen, to have that other musical component, because, again, music is a big part of it. So the 5-10-year plan of Griot Enterprises is to become a multimedia company. So not messing around.
Yeah, we were discussing that a little bit with last week's guest, but essentially it sounds like Griot Enterprises is going to become a transmedia company, because you're going to have several different media landscapes where you're going to be plying, your universe. So, there'll be, it sounds like you're going to have an online component. You may even have an animated component. You may have, who knows, premiums, toys, a game, an actual movie. I mean, it does sound like you've got a pretty good and ambitious, and I don't mean ambitious in like, oh, that's too big. I mean ambitious in that that's great vision and ambitious look forward in terms of managing your creative resources.
Or managing the brand. And it's interesting that, people talk about, I've heard the term transmedia, and people talk about it as this new term. But if you really think about it, again, DC and Marvel, they're transmedia companies, or rather they are components of a larger transmedia company. So this isn't anything new. I think what's interesting is that people are now beginning to understand the diversity of how to get your story out there, how to get your message out there.
Well, and the barrier to getting it out has been lowered considerably. When you talk about self-publishing in all of these genres, whether it be books, comics, animation, webisodes, even TV shows, what would be called traditional TV shows that are available online, the barrier to entry, the cost of entry has been lowered considerably.
It's been lowered considerably. The thing is now, since it's been lowered considerably, now the proof is in the pudding. Now it is really about quality of product. Not only is it quality of product, but you have to put your big boy pants on now. It's not enough to make it. Now you have to market it. Now, and you have to be out there, and you have to be aware, and you have to use social media in a very smart way. You have to figure out how to navigate those fields. And another thing that you have to realize, especially as a creator, is that you can't do it by yourself. And you shouldn't do it by yourself. And so you have to seek out like-minded people that can help you in areas that you don't know about.
Right.
That's what business is. You know, that's one of the things that business does. So, you know, when I talk to people about this, you know, when I start talking to people really about the things that you have to understand about the industry, that's the kind of things that I talk about. I used to talk about the art, and I used to tell them about the art and so on and so forth. And then I realized, as I was talking to the people who were showing me their work, I realized visually their work was on point. And so really the question is, like, okay, you're wondering how to get into this. And so there have been a couple people that I see who have gotten the chops, and more importantly, they have the desire. And more importantly, they have the desire to learn and to be serious about their career. And so those are the people that I continue to have dialogue with. I'm always open to talking to people and helping them on their way. At the same time, I had to learn that, like, I cannot hold your hand. And if you're looking at me to hold your hand and you're looking at me to bless you with something, that ain't going to happen. You understand?
Yeah.
Like I got to see that you put enough into yourself that you were making it happen regardless if you're talking to me or you're not talking to me. That's not going to stop you from making your reality happen. Those are the people that I want to deal with.
Right. In my arena, it's people who go, hey, if I give you all my ideas, can you ghostwrite my book?
Yeah, you hear that. You hear that all the time, and then you have to tell them. Yeah, then you have to tell them, well, it's not going to be your book anymore, and so you have to. And so you're going to have to share some things, and then some people are going to be like, well, you know, and then you just have to walk away.
And you know what? And then you find out 10 years later they never did anything anyway because they want somebody to do it for them.
Right.
You mentioned some teaching and things like that. We've got about 7-8 minutes here. What kind of community outreach do you do?
Well, I speak. I've spoken at colleges. I was an associate professor at the Illinois Institute of Art in Schaumburg. I've been adjunct faculty at International Academy of Design and Technology. Currently, I've also spoken at various schools. I've spoken at from the whole gamut, from grade school to high school to colleges. So I've spoken at places like Woodward Academy, which is a charter school in Detroit. I've also spoken at DePaul University. I recently wrapped up something with the University of Illinois Chicago for their Freedom Dreams, Freedom Now conference. I'm currently working on a project with the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, where I'm basically taking East African mythology and doing a mythological remix of it. And so getting the word of comics, getting the word of culture, and using comics as culture, so on and so forth, that's where I'm at right now. I consider myself an educational Ronin, if you will, at this stage.
Okay, and for those of you who are not Japanese, you could look up Ronin. And it was also a great movie title with Robert De Niro in it too. That's pretty cool that you got that much, that you touched that many lives. Do you get out to like conventions, Comic Cons and things like that yet, or where are you in terms of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing cons since I was starting to get into the game. So I've been doing conventions since '93.
Okay.
You'll always find me. I just did C2E2. In the fall and September, I will be doing the Motor City Black Age of Comics convention.
Mm-hmm.
I will also be doing New York Comic Con as well. I'm avoiding San Diego because San Diego the dollars have to make sense to go out to San Diego, especially the way that San Diego is run right now.
Well, the San Diego event is basically it's a product rollout event. I mean, that's what it's been. It's been taken over by big money, and that's what big money wants. You know, Apple rolls out stuff. Everybody rolls out products at the San Diego Comic-Con. Oh, and we've got the new basic trailer, and we've got a production trailer 15 minutes long for our new movie that'll be out next year, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're right. That's a considerable expense for, unless you're a major media player, for not very much return. Obviously, people will see you, but sometimes that's just not cost effective.
Well, it's like at this point, and again with San Diego actually from its inception has always been that type of show. It's just that now, again, you know, the hip-hop analogy, now the comic book movies are making money, everybody and their mama is going out to San Diego. So the comics are getting lost in the shuffle, especially the independent comics are getting lost in the shuffle. So in terms of, if you want to get your book out there, you want to get your book noticed, and you are, you know, I'm not even a new jack. I've been in this game since, you know, officially I've been in the game, or Griot Enterprises has been in the game since 1999. So, so I'm not a newbie coming in here. But again, financially, especially now, it's like the dollars have to make sense. And if you don't have the dollars to push it out there to compete in that cacophony that San Diego is now, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
You see what I mean?
C2,
so
C2E2 is an intimate setting. You know, the cons that they have, you know, all the Black Age cons are of a sufficient size that you can get, you know, if you pay your money, get your table, you're going to be able to meet and press flesh with a number of people. But again, even that is a calculation that has to be made too. You know, a lot of these people already know about me. Is this worth, you know, whatever? But one of the things that I want to remind you of is, you know, there's an events calendar at the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website, and I always ask guests to post up coming appearances that they may have at conventions, book signings, and things like that, because when people have some free time, they can always take a look at the calendar and see what may be happening nearby that they could go and check out. So if you remember to do that, you know, the next time you're going to head someplace, you know, like if you're coming at C2E2 next year, obviously I'll actually get out of the house and be there. I had to work this year. Well, no,
gotcha.
I'm serious. I mean, you know, but for an author, you know, people say, "Oh, I sold a whole bunch of books," but for an author, it's not as
it's not as conducive.
It really isn't. Yeah, and you know, it's hard enough to get black folks who know about me to read my books, let alone sit at a table with a pile of them and going, please pay some attention to me, please.
Right. You're better off at a book fair. I mean, that's
exactly.
That's the better option for you.
And I was stupid. You know, all of a sudden, you know, in 2001, I decided to become an author, and now fewer people are reading than ever. So I got to rework this thing. You know, somehow my timing was really bad. Hey, look, we have just about run out of time, Jiba, and we have taken up. I mean, did that seem like 2 hours to you?
Yeah, that's no, not really. We've been having a conversation.
Exactly. But we will have you back, you know, when you're further down the line, when new things may be coming out. It's been a pleasure having you here. And I want to remind everybody that the show is broadcast live, or at least we record it live, Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And that very shortly after that, within the next day, the show is put up as a podcast. So please, everybody tell your friends. Black Science Fiction Society is branching out. It's doing a lot of unusually new and cool things. And one of them, not the least of them, is that BSFS is doing its own feature movie. It's a 3D movie, and that should be out, in the next couple of years. We're doing a lot of work on it. Jarvis Sheffield, the administrator, is always improving the site, keeping up with stuff, finding new people for me to interview and things like that. For that, he should be thanked. And as we do every week, I'm going to turn it over to Jarvis to take us on out of the show here.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man, it was beautiful. You were great, man. And you know what? I'll hit you up with a message so that we can get together and have lunch together. How's that sound?
It sounds good to me. Me. Always good to connect and to build the tribe, man. That's exactly what we are. We are a tribe.
Yes, we are. All right, Jarvis.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. As always, I want to thank you for doing a great job of keeping the show entertaining, Brother William, and also for our guest, Jiba. Man, you really set it off tonight. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience with us, because, you really dropped some interesting stuff tonight about the Orishas, also the licensing issues with various properties, amongst other things. But those are two takeaways that I had from all the information that you were sharing with us, and also everyone that tuned in and that supports us with what we're trying to do on the site. And I want to also invite you to post some more information about what you're doing, not only in the calendar, but post some of your videos or graphics of your project on the site so we can push that out to all the membership. I think we're up to 4,000 now, so I'm sure they would all appreciate seeing some new cool stuff.
I'll definitely do that. And again, thank you so much for allowing me this forum to ramble. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it is quite all right, man. It is quite all right. That's what we're about. We're about spreading the word about Black science fiction. We're about creating science fiction. We're about marketing science fiction and networking with each other to build, because we want better for our kids than we grew up with. And with all the wealth of talent on the site, we can make that possible.
Right on.
All right. We're going to shut it down, and I'll probably be over in the main chat room on the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. I had to get up and go to a track meet early in the morning, so I'm not going to be on too late tonight. So thank you again. Thank you, everybody. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
And thank you very much, Jiba. We'll catch up with you soon, okay?
Definitely. You guys have a great evening, okay?
All right.
You too. And thank you, everybody who was in the chat room. It was good to see you there. Everybody have a great night.
Yay.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. 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 Bye-bye.